Now, that history is important because we know that the vote is the way we express agency. And from a faith perspective, our vote is critical for how we protect the most vulnerable, how we protect the most marginalized. Now, fast forward in history and understand kind of the current context that we're in, the current struggle we're in, we have to go back to the year 2000, that highly contested election between between candidate Gore and candidate Bush, where ultimately Bush prevailed. And you remember all the controversies in Florida with hanging chads and a very narrow election. Well, a group of Republican operatives went down to Miami-Dade County and started to allege election fraud in that particular county. That was the beginning of an ongoing campaign that has only grown more sophisticated and more significant, where a faction within the Republican Party has had a very deliberate strategy of trying to suppress the votes of certain communities, particularly of the Black community, but also the Latino community, in some cases of young people, in order to maintain political power. They have recognized that the changing demographics in this country are not working in the favor of the Republican Party. Now, they could decide, and we're a nonpartisan organization like Interfaith, Power, and Light. They could decide, and I hope they would decide, that they would try to have a broader appeal to a larger electorate, that they would fight for the votes of African Americans and Latino Americans. But instead, they have chosen a strategy of subtraction rather than addition, where they are making it more difficult for certain communities to vote in order to blunt some of the impact of these changing demographics. Now, it's really important to emphasize that this strategy, again, kind of started in 2000, has been continuing ever since, and then got supercharged by a Supreme Court decision in 2013 entitled Shelby versus Holder, where the state of Alabama had a series of voting barriers in place, and Shelby County took the Justice Department all the way to the Supreme Court, basically arguing that the provisions in the Voting Rights Act, particularly the provision that ensured that any change in a southern state, because of the history of voter suppression, would have to then be approved and reviewed by the Justice Department, that provision got removed. They basically took the teeth out of, it's called the pre-clearance provision, got removed, stripped from the Voting Rights Act. And that then opened up the floodgates for many states in the South, but also in the Midwest, to start putting in place new barriers, often more sophisticated barriers that made it difficult for certain communities to vote. There is a playbook that has been put in place that even before the 2020 election, we saw many states starting to put in place these kind of barriers. They include everything from limiting early voting, which is very popular in communities of color, to moving polling sites, oftentimes, disproportionately impacting communities of color, enabling voting purges to take place, where literally, if people have not voted in 2 consecutive elections, they could be removed from the voting roll, even if oftentimes, communities of color might move more often, they might not get the notice in the mail and lose their opportunity to vote as a result. Robocalls that are spreading misinformation, voter intimidation. There's a whole series of tactics that have been a part of this overall playbook. And in different combinations, they have been utilized in a number of states. Sojourners, in concert with the National African American Clergy Network, mounted a campaign called Lawyers and Colors in 2016 and 2018 to try to mobilize the faith community to protect the right to vote. Congressman John Lewis described the right to vote as sacred. He said that it is the most powerful, non-violent tool we have in our possession in a democracy. We believe that it's critical to frame the protecting the right to vote in the context of protecting Imago Dei itself, the core belief that unifies Christianity and Judaism and many Muslims, that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and that any effort to try to deny or make it more difficult for people to exercise that sacred right to vote is in essence an attack on Imago Dei itself.